weeks later, for which he wrote the screenplay, but his directorial debut was Brighton Rock novel in 2010, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you go about adapting a novel for a screenplay. You know, what attracts you to a novel in the first place, and what you have to change about it to turn it into a movie rather than a text.
Feels like a criminal record. It depends on the novel. Martin Booth's book is very different from the final film, The American.
Can I just check, can everyone hear Rowan at the back? You might want to hold your mic just a little bit close. You have to almost kind of give it a little kiss. You have to make friends with the mic.
It's a little intimate. Okay, so Martin Booth's novel was quite different from the finished film, whereas Steve's was a novel I was able to be relatively faithful to, certainly compared to Martin's book. And it's...
Why was that? What was the difference between them?
I was just realising I dug myself a hole.
I didn't say it was easy questions to start with, did I?
Okay, put it its bluntest, I think there were two things. First of all, Steve's book had... Steve's book was entertaining. I didn't have to make it more so. It was emotionally gripping and involving in a way that I could see would work for a mainstream cinema audience, or at least I felt would. In fairness to Martin's, I'm not sure that's true.
Okay.
The second reason Steve's book was easier is I think that cinema audiences expect a degree of, and I'm going to use realism, aware that you're a doctor of the subject with a small r, but I mean realisticness is what I really mean. I think cinema audiences want 2 and 2 to make 4, in a way that novel readerships don't necessarily require. So sometimes there are I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed in the transition from novel to film. This was much less admirably of making that thriller realistic and convincing.
I'll come to Steve in a moment. I've just got a follow-up on that, which is that's very interesting because, of course, the novel of The American has the happy ending where they go off into the sunset. And Steve's novel has the uncertain ending where you don't actually know, for those who've read the novel, a bit of a spoiler, but you don't actually know at the end of your novel whether she's going to wake up with her memory or not. The filmic equivalent would be ending in her with the ambulance recording, where she's determined she's going to remember, but you don't. If the film ended there, you wouldn't know whether she was going to. So you've kind of done something different. So with The American, the novel had the happy ending, but the film is uncertain, and with Steve's novel, the novel had the uncertain ending, but the film is the happy ending. So I was really curious about those choices.
Shall I come in?
Yeah, go on, Steve. Get Rowan out.
Maybe I'm slightly biased, but I don't really see. A lot of people have said, "Oh, the ending's slightly different, isn't it?" But I don't really see that ending as being
really?
that different from the book.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm not just saying that through solidarity, but I honestly don't. I mean, I do think Rowan's ending in the film still does have that ambiguity of yes, obviously she's remembered some things, but also in the book she does. I mean, she has recollections of Nash's hair or something. I think that she, So I do play with the idea that some memories are still there, but I think they both end in this uncertain note of exactly how much does she remember. Is it all back? Or are there still gaping holes? I mean, the fact, I think, I was noticing just standing at the back watching the end of the movie there, that she doesn't really seem to remember much about Nash, for example, who you'd think would be somebody that she'd remember. So I don't see the endings as being that different. That's
curious, actually. I had the luxury of seeing a pre-screening this morning and then just watching it, and actually for the second viewing it seems less happy. I think maybe, I don't know, there's something about maybe going from the horror of the hotel scene to the happiness and the brightness and the white doors and makes you feel like you've gone from one end of the spectrum to the other, but actually watching it a second time I saw the nuances a bit more possibly. Well, another
it's very emotional to watch them perform that, but it's going to sound like name dropping, but I bumped into Nicole Kidman.
As you do.
As you do, yeah. I was on my way into the house. She was on the way out of the house, and I just had a few words. And I said to her, because she was soaking wet, rain machine going, cold water, cold dirty water probably. I think she was wrapped in a towel. And I said, oh, by the way, in the book, this scene takes place in a nice suburban living room in front of a roaring log fire. And she just said to me, she said she's very, very polite, very nice, very, she wasn't patronising, but she just said to me, yeah, but this is more dramatic. So I think it's affected my writing in that way. And now when I'm writing, I'm constantly thinking, could I set this scene somewhere other than in the living room? Somewhere that's intrinsically more dramatic and would give the characters, not so much actors necessarily, but give characters more to play with.
That's interesting. So not necessarily influence on plot, but location. I'm thinking like Cormac McCarthy, who clearly is writing with these amazing kind of vast American landscapes in mind that work beautifully on screen. That's interesting. There could be different setting that changes. Yeah. Okay. We've talked for quite a lot. Yes, I can see someone with a hand just there. Have we got a roving mic? Yeah, it's coming to you, sir.
Hello. I just would like to pick up from what Steve just said and want to ask the direct question about that training scene, because the story I found very good, and I can imagine that Hitchcock would have loved it. I don't know if he was an inspiration for you when you wrote it, but especially that scene I found very stereotypical, I must say. That was for me a little bit too much Hollywood. So I think these kind of Hollywood elements in it, they were a bit of a spoiler for me, for a very great story. So I don't know if your film was done independently
or
like
the Expendables. And what the Expendables allows them to do is then to make smaller art house movies. This isn't a small art house movie. It's sort of, I suppose, what you would call a low to mid budget. And this is pretty low. This is $12 million I made this for, which isn't a lot of money, especially when you've got two big stars. So there was very little pressure on me to set scenes in the rain in order to tick studio boxes. I can't blame the studio. So if it was stereotypical, that's entirely my bad taste. I'm not quite sure why I set it in the rain. I remember coming up with the idea, and I remember thinking along very similar lines to setting Pinky and Rose. There's a great moment in the book where he says, I'm bad and you're good, we're made for each other. And I decided to set that in the rain too. I think maybe I'm just a cheesy bastard and I don't really have a clever answer to that.
Hey, I could have a more intellectual answer. There's when you move between different scenes, there's that kind of swerviness on screen. And of course, in the novel, she has the recollections of being drowned in the orange blossom water. So I was actually picking up the water theme as coming through from the novel. And of course, there isn't a memory of drowning in the film, but it could be that the water was haunting you from your reading of the novel.
There is a less falsely modest reason. When you're working with actors, Steve said, the original scene was set in a suburban living room. Sometimes actors, the clue is in the word act, action, something that involves your body. And a lot of times when you're working on a film set, you're doing the same scene over and over again under immense time pressure and hot lights. Actors start to act from here. And when that happens, you do, sir, with all due respect, get stereotypical performances. And my job as a director is to break through the difficulties that those actors are having and allow them sometimes to get free of their intellect, their jadedness, their tiredness, their boredom, the fact that they're texting their husbands or their wives, whatever it is, and to reactivate their physical presence, their awareness, their connection with their body, to allow them to actually take action. And it's a very different performance you're going to get from Nicole Kidman when she is rushing out into the rain, into the ice-cold rain, drenched over her body, and is able to scream and shout. And the dynamic, and if you watch the scene again, you'll see it. It's a fantastic dynamic that Colin plays, because what he plays is a very particular English kind of villain at that moment. He's embarrassed about what the neighbours think. He looks around at the house to check no one is looking. And later we realise that that's not just a particularly English villain, that's somebody who is living a lie and wants to make sure that nobody has witnessed that lie. So I would, in defence of that scene, say that it is multi-layered, and those were the decisions behind
Take
setting
away
it outside.
that's fantastic.
Do we have another question here at the front? Yes.
Steve, when you first started this amazing book, and I think when you were on the phone with Colin, you were about 3 chapters in, did you actually have the whole plot ahead of you, or was it organic? Did it evolve organically? Because it is so multifaceted and layered. And
Yeah, Liz is asking about whether at what point
I
really
think they know each other.
Did the plot kind of come together? Yeah, it was about 3 chapters in. I think I started off. I decided I didn't want to spend ages planning a book out in great detail, because I tried that with a book that I finished working on. It had just not really worked, and I wasn't happy with. So I thought I want to just have an idea, start writing, and see where the story and the characters take me. So I did that, and after about 3 chapters, I just realised that really the book needed something else. I couldn't just sustain a 300-page novel that was just about a woman who woke up every day and didn't know anything, and didn't have, there needed a thriller element, I suppose. And I suppose I was also thinking, I mean, you mentioned earlier Hitchcock, and I mean, I wasn't necessarily thinking Hitchcock at the time, but I do love those stories, those films and books that have those amazing twists. So I suppose that part of me was wanting to do something like that. What about if actually there was a secret that the reader can uncover gradually at the same time as the character? So about 3 weeks into writing it, I then saw the end of the book, and the truth, the fact that her husband isn't her husband, and so on. And then I began to think in a bit more detail about plotting it all out. So it came fairly early on, and it was good when it did, because I wouldn't have finished it otherwise.
Lovely. There's a gentleman down here at the front. Yes, I forgot. Yeah. Oh, we got the mic. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Question to the two of you. I'm always fascinated by the partnership between a director and a writer when the director's adapting the writer's book, because quite often they can be very brutal and very blunt with the adaptation, and sometimes they don't want the writer looking over their shoulder, and sometimes they do. And I wondered, can I ask the two of you how that partnership worked and what your relationship was when you were working on the film?
Do I need to separate you now at this point? Are we okay?
Who wants to go first?
Steve's been a delight from beginning to end. I'm really lucky. This would be an insurmountably depressing process if the author hated the movie. I'm just not that kind of filmmaker. Some directors are. Some directors really are thick-skinned, brutal, visionary men. I'm unfortunately none of those things. So
you are a man.
I'm 1 out of 4.
I think, unless we've got some kind of press exclusive.
I'm so lucky. I feel really blessed. Steve's been a real support.
Thank you. I've also heard stories about filmmakers being brutal and riding roughshod over. And so for that reason, I think from the very first moment it looked even possible it was going to be turned into a movie, I made the decision to sort of, in a way, divorce myself from the process, because I thought I could, if it never happens, because I've heard so many stories about films that are nearly made and they never quite happen. I thought I won't be disappointed if I'm not too excited. And I thought my job really was to make sure that the book was in the right people's hands. And so I remember I met with Rowan and with Liza, the producer, very early on. I think before we'd even started talking about striking a deal and coming up with contracts or anything, and we just spent an hour or two talking about the film that Rowan and Liza wanted to make. And I remember there was one moment where you took a file out of your bag, and it was this thick, and it was called "Before I Go to Sleep" written on it. And I thought, he's not even started properly working on it yet, and he already done this much work, and Rowan knew how the story fitted together. It felt almost more than I did at the time, and I just felt, we talked about the film that they wanted to make, and I just thought these are the right people to make this movie. I just had this instinct that they were the right people, and that's my job done now, actually. So although all the way through the process I was involved, and Rowan sent me drafts of the script and talked to me about casting and about the locations and everything at every stage. I always thought, unless I really, really disagree with something, I'll just let him make his film. And then, I had faith, and I don't think there was anything I really didn't completely agree with. So it was a joyous process for me too, because I could just enjoy the good bits, enjoy the going on set and chatting to Nicole Kidman.
In her towel.
In her towel, yeah, and but not have to do any of the work.
Can I pick you up on that? Just another question I'm going to slip in, which was about the casting, actually, or casting. Now I'm down south, not casting. But because it's clever with the guys, because they're both playing counter stereotype, aren't they? So Colin Firth, we know as Mr. Darcy, the romantic lover, and he actually is playing the baddie. And Mark Stone normally plays the baddie, and he's
Strong.
Sorry, Mark Strong. I was thinking about the girl who plays the character in Magic in the Moonlight, where Colin Firth is also playing slightly out of camp. So too many films in too few days. Mark Strong. So was that purposeful, so that you could play with the kind of intimation that possibly Mark's character was the baddie, because the audience would have that kind of background presupposition? Was that, or were they just available?
It was deliberate. Yeah, it was. We did our homework, and we thought anything we can do to protect the twist was one reason. Another reason was, Colin Firth was my dream to play that role from early on. A sort of dream I shared with a couple of people in a half embarrassed way, like, we'll never get Colin Firth, will we? So when we did, it was extraordinary. I couldn't believe it. And Mark Strong, I just think, is an exceptionally good actor, and a lovely man, and looks extraordinary on film.
There's some coming down from the bottom here. So we don't need a Mr. Darcy coming out the lake when we've got Mark Strong.
It was lovely, and they were cast. The two of them were cast in another movie called Kingsman, which isn't out yet. But yeah, it was great to play that trick.
Lovely. Anyone else?
You've got a question up at the top.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. Some spotters.
A question mainly for Steve, but not exclusively. Christine doesn't remember the previous day. She doesn't seem to see anybody other than Ben, who's really Mike. But why does he have to pretend to be Ben? What's his motive for doing that at all? He doesn't know reason, does he?
I can't remember. It was 4 years ago.
Not good enough, Steve. That's not good enough.
Someone's uncovered the plot hole. God, that's a really good point, isn't it?
Wasn't it because he was signing her out of hospital?
Yes.
But she wouldn't remember that, so he only needs to do that for one day, and then he could have reverted to...
No, she does. We know the film's very clear that her memory condition is not consistent.
That's true, yeah.
At any point she can remember the fact that she's married to a man called Ben.
So it's to make sure that if that moment of memory happens, he's not in...
But if she had a moment of memory, she'd remember that he didn't look like that.
Well...
And this man was a complete stranger in her bed.
Yes, but that's why he's been to the effort that he's been to, putting up hundreds of photographs all over the wall, photo albums. Each day he's retraining her mind, which is neuropsychologically possible, at least according to the two experts that I spoke to. It is possible to retrain your thinking by daily, consistent and overwhelming stimulus, especially visual.
Well, that's called building up a habit. You just remember where your keys are because you put them in the same place.
Yeah, exactly. And it's an extremely effective tool, and it's the one he uses.
And don't forget, if she looks at him and goes, "You're Ben, but you don't look like the Ben I remember," then he's just got to say, "Well, look at the photos. Look, obviously you're getting confused." She's only got to remember his name is Mike once, and then remember the name of the man she had the affair with is Mike once, and then she'd know. So that's probably why he doesn't use his real name.
I'm anticipating that we're going to get the wrap-up signal from the back shortly, so I want to move on to give, if there's anybody else who is dying to ask questions, a chance to do so. Go ahead. Do we need the mic down here? Is that okay?
The question is, I chose Christine to be an amnesiac, and does that stem from anything, given my background of working in the NHS? And the answer is not consciously, no.
Could you repeat the question first for us?
I did. The question is, I chose Christine to be an amnesiac, and does that come from anything to do with my background in working in the health service? And the answer is not really, no. I'm not consciously, anyway. I read an obituary of a man who had suffered with a memory condition, and I just, at the time, thought that could make, I could see that character. It sparked the idea of the character in my head, and I thought I could turn that possibly into a novel. But I think, in retrospect, there's a reason why I read that obituary and this character came, and I thought, yes, that's my subject. I didn't know it at the time, but in retrospect, I think there were lots of things I've been thinking about identity and about who we are, and about the path that we maybe take through life, and the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of our life, and all those kinds of issues were swirling around in my brain as I had my midlife crisis and decided I wanted to be a novelist. So I think that's the reason. So it didn't really stem from any direct link with my work, no.
I've thought of another reason, by the way. That gentleman up there, I can't see. Mike had a brief affair with her, which ended with him beating her up because she fell out of love with him and tried to escape. So given that he's in love with her and is trying to engender a happy romantic relationship, it's an act of wish fulfillment on his part. I want to be someone I'm not. I want to be the person, in the end, she walked away from me to go back to. That seems to be a pretty massively good reason for why he does that.
It's a much better answer than mine.
I just needed 10 minutes to think.
See what I mean about choosing the right person?